position. They covered them with bigger rocks so the hyenas and other animals couldn't dig them up and eat them. And then there was something else. There was only one thing. There was no tools. There was no weapons. There was no precious metals, no jewels, no writings or tablets. There was none of that. There was only one other thing in the grave. There was only one other thing in the grave, along with the Neanderthal's skeleton. A little clay jug. In every grave, there was a little clay jug of wood ashes. Now, wood ashes are not carbon. Wood ashes are plant minerals that are left when you burn away the carbon in the wood. Wood ashes are plant minerals that are left when you burn away the carbon in the wood. Now, here's the most fascinating part. When they did an analysis of the bones of the Neanderthals, and they did an analysis of the wood ashes, guess what? The analyses are identical. That's why the Neanderthals' bones are like steel. They survived 50,000 years in the soil without decomposing because they had so much minerals in them. Well, where did the minerals come from? Well, from wood ashes. They began to put wood ashes in their food. Now, they weren't great gardeners, but they began to put wood ashes in their food, especially if they were away from the ocean, up in the mountains. They didn't have access to salt easily, and so they began to sprinkle wood ashes on their food. Have you ever dropped a hot dog or a hamburger in the ashes at a campfire when you're barbecuing and you just try and wipe it off and blow it up and then eat it? Well, they figured out, somebody accidentally found out, well, this is a worldwide event. The Great Leap Forward. You can look it up in any anthropology text. They say somewhere between 30 and 50,000 years ago, the Great Leap Forward occurred, and the Neanderthals were the initiators, and the anthropologists wanted to attribute it to their larynx. Well, why did they have this bucket of wood ashes in there? They knew. They were clever enough to know. They didn't know nutrition. They didn't know biochemistry. But they know that that was the thing that made them different. And I just thought that was phenomenal. Plant minerals. Do we talk about plant minerals? Hallelujah, yeah. Back in the 1930s, the longest lived and the most recognized healthy and long-lived peoples were the Hunzas, who live in northern Pakistan. And Art Linkletter wanted to live to be 100. You've all heard, most of you have heard Art Linkletter. And he hired an eye doctor by the name of Alan Bannock to go to Hunza up in northern Pakistan to figure out why they lived to be 100, and why their average lifespan was 90, and why they were so healthy. They're a third world country. They didn't have hospitals and doctors and drugs and insurance, so why did they live so long? So Alan Bannock was hired by Art Linkletter to go to Hunza and find out their secret. He stayed there 6 months. He was kind of an amateur farmer and an eye doctor, and he came back and he put everything he learned in a book. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. He knew it had something to do with their diet and their cultural habits, but that was about it. Well, there's two things that jump out at you in this book. Number one, they farmed at 19,500 feet of altitude. Now, that's 4 miles high. Now, that in and of itself is meaningless information. But at 19,500 foot elevation, the growing season is only 45 days. And potatoes and corn and rice and wheat and barley and oats and rye all require 90 to 120 days to grow. So it wasn't some revelation from any place, or some clever scientists figured it out. Just because of where they chose to live from a defensive standpoint, they picked this high place so they could defend it, but they couldn't grow carbohydrates. So their diet was exclusively goat meat, mutton, lamb, chicken, eggs, cheese, butter. All the things we're not supposed to eat. Animal fats and animal proteins, almost no vegetable material, almost none. The only vegetables or fruit they had was apricots, and that's how they got their omega-3s, where they cracked the apricot seeds, and they would actually take the oils, the omega-3 oils, out of the apricot seeds. So they had a very low, very highly restricted caloric diet. Almost no carbohydrates. And secondly, the thing that jumped out at me was a whole chapter devoted to wood ashes. They took the wood ashes from the heating and cooking fires, and they put them in their gardens for their little bit of tomatoes and onions and garlic, which they made kind of a salsa to put on their meat and cheese and stuff. And they mixed their salt with it because salt was very expensive. They lived up in the mountains, had no access to the sea. They were very poor, so nobody wanted to climb all the way up 19,500 feet for a cup of coffee because there was nothing to trade for. And so they were isolated, and they used wood ashes as salt. So they would mix 10 parts wood ashes to 1 part salt and put in their food as a condiment. They put them in their gardens as fertilizers, and the tomatoes and the garlic took everything up. And they ate the tomatoes and garlic and got minerals that way. It would put it in their food with the salt. And so it satisfies restricted calories without malnutrition. Plant minerals and restricting calories.